It all started, as most of Ethan Morgan's bad ideas did, with a free drink and a half-baked dare. The Intergalactic Summit was the sort of event where politicians wore gravity-defying suits, aliens flaunted extra limbs like fashion statements, and the buffet tables looked like art installations built by someone who had never seen food before. Ethan, low-ranking diplomat and full-time accidental trouble magnet, was trying his best not to get fired before dessert. His primary mission was simple: represent Earth, shake a few tentacles, and avoid starting any wars. And then he saw her. It was impossible not to. Across the polished crystal floor, under the pulsing light of a suspended miniature sun, she stood like a storm bottled inside a dress of shifting silver threads. Her skin was luminous, almost human, but kissed with an otherworldly pale glow. Her hair spilled down her back in a river of molten gold, and her ears, long, tapered elegantly like a sculptor's dream, peeked through in a way that made Ethan's mouth go dry. She moved with a lethal grace, like a blade barely sheathed. For a moment he forgot where he was. Forgot he was wearing a rental suit 2 sizes too big. Forgot that the ambassador had told him, in no uncertain terms, "Ethan, for the love of every god known to sentient beings, do not get involved in any diplomatic incidents." Which was unfortunate, because at that exact moment she turned her gaze on him and smiled. There are smiles that promise polite conversation. There are smiles that hint at mischief. Hers was neither. It was a challenge, an invitation to fall headfirst into something that would undoubtedly end with explosions, lawsuits, or both. His buddy from the logistics crew, Jonas, elbowed him hard enough to knock the breath out of him. "Don't even think about it, man. That's Leora Velsharn, Eldrith nobility. She's, very important." "Important how?" Ethan croaked, still staring. "Like, if you spill your drink on her, Earth might end up as somebody's backyard barbecue pit." "Good to know," Ethan muttered, brushing imaginary dust off his jacket and deciding that fate, clearly, had chosen violence tonight. Before he could second-guess himself, he crossed the floor. The force field separating the dignitaries from the rest of the rabble shimmered faintly, like a bubble blown from starlight. As he approached, the guard, a humorless slab of meat in chrome armor, gave him the kind of look normally reserved for viruses and particularly annoying hovercraft salesmen. "I'm on the guest list," Ethan lied cheerfully. The guard didn't even blink. "Name? Sir Ethan of Morgan, slayer of awkward conversations." A moment passed. Another. Then the guard's visor flickered and inexplicably parted to let him through. Ethan made a mental note to both thank and bribe whoever had hacked the security system on his behalf. And then he was standing before her. Up close, she was even more devastating. Her eyes weren't just blue. They were deep enough to fall into, speckled with tiny flecks of silver, like someone had trapped entire galaxies in them. She smelled faintly of something alien and addictive. Cool night air after a storm, electric and dangerous. "You," she said, voice soft and musical, "are either incredibly brave or incredibly foolish." "Can it be both?" Ethan grinned. "I multitask." She laughed. It wasn't a polite, courtly chuckle, but a genuine sound, rich and startled. Around them, dignitaries whispered and turned to stare, but Leora paid them no mind. She tilted her head, studying him like he was an unexpectedly fascinating bug. "I am Leora Velsharn," she said. "Ethan Morgan," he replied, "Earth's ambassador of poor decisions." She smiled again. God, that smile. And Ethan's stomach did a somersault. Before he could say something else embarrassingly stupid, an older Eldrith man approached. His robes shimmered with authority, and his expression said he would rather be anywhere else, perhaps being gnawed on by space piranhas. "Your Majesty," he said stiffly, bowing, "the council has convened. It is time." "Majesty?" Ethan blinked. He opened his mouth, closed it, and tried very hard not to panic. Leora turned back to him, her eyes alight with mischief. "Walk with me, Sir Ethan." It wasn't a request. Stumbling after her through winding crystal halls, Ethan learned several important things in quick succession. 1. The Eldrith took their traditions very seriously. 2. By accepting her invitation and entering the diplomatic enclosure without official sanction, He had accidentally triggered something called the right of first bond. And 3, he was now unofficially, pending about 50 layers of bureaucratic approval, engaged to the crown princess of the Eldrith Empire. There was a pause while his brain tried to process that. "Wait," he said finally, voice cracking slightly. "Are you saying we're—" "Betrothed," Leora confirmed, tone suspiciously cheerful. "Like, married? Eventually. It's all very ceremonial. Unless you object?" Her eyes glinted. He did object. Very much. He objected with every fiber of his being. Unfortunately, the alternative seemed to involve starting a small, incredibly messy interstellar war. So Ethan, in a fit of what he could only later describe as terminal stupidity, shrugged and said, "Sure. Why not? What's the worst that could happen?" By the time the wedding ceremony started, Ethan had resigned himself to his fate. The Grand Hall of Eldrith was an architectural wonder, a cathedral of living crystal that sang when you brushed against it. Leora stood across from him in a gown that shimmered like captured starlight, looking simultaneously regal and ready to bite someone's head off. At the time, he thought that was just a figure of speech. The efficient, a giant orb of sentient plasma named Reverence, floated between them and droned solemn words in a language that sounded suspiciously like someone gargling marbles. Ethan's translation earpiece struggled valiantly. He hesitated for a millisecond too long. Leora's long ears twitched in warning. "I do," he blurted. She smiled at him, a smile full of promises and secrets. He smiled back, pretending he wasn't absolutely sure he had just signed his own death warrant. When the ceremony ended, and the cheers and several ominous howls of the gathered Eldrith filled the hall, Leora leaned in close, her lips brushing his ear. "You are mine now, husband," she whispered, her breath cool against his skin. Somewhere deep inside him, Ethan heard a tiny voice squeak. "This is fine. Everything's fine. We're all fine here." And for a moment, he almost believed it. Almost. Their honeymoon began aboard the Celestial Waltz, a luxury pleasure cruiser that drifted lazily through the Seraphim Nebula, which according to the tourist pamphlet was best enjoyed with a cocktail in one hand and zero expectations of surviving the local wildlife. Ethan had barely finished unpacking his one suitcase, containing 3 shirts, 2 pairs of socks, and a pocket translation guide titled "How Not to Accidentally Propose Marriage in 40 Alien Languages," when Leora swept into their suite like a storm with impeccable hair. She wore a flowing tunic embroidered with constellations, and despite the casual attire, still managed to look like she could command a fleet with a snap of her fingers. "We have a reception tonight," she announced, tossing a holographic invitation at him. "Diplomats, minor royalty, at least 2 assassins pretending to be caterers." Ethan caught the invitation clumsily. "Sounds cozy. Should I bring a casserole?" She gave him a look, half amused, half exasperated. "Just try not to get poisoned before dessert." "That's a lot of pressure. What if I only get slightly poisoned?" "You're remarkably optimistic for a man so frequently in mortal peril." He grinned. "Part of my charm." The reception was held in the ship's grand ballroom, a vast chamber of transparent walls that gave the unnerving illusion of dancing directly among the stars. Ethan spent the first hour dodging suspicious-looking appetizers, and the second hour trying to keep track of the number of languages he was accidentally butchering. Leora, meanwhile, glided through the crowd like a queen among planets, accepting greetings, exchanging diplomatic platitudes, and occasionally shooting Ethan glances that felt somewhere between "I'm proud of you" and "I will murder you if you start a conga line." Somewhere between his third and fourth awkward handshake with a sentient bouquet of flowers representing the Trillion Confederacy, Ethan noticed something odd. Leora wasn't eating, at all. While Ethan politely pretended to enjoy something that might have once been meat, or a very angry vegetable, she moved among the guests without touching a single dish. When offered a goblet of spiced nebula wine, she merely smiled and passed it along. Maybe it was just a cultural thing. Maybe the Eldrith didn't eat at social functions. Or maybe, his mind offered unhelpfully, she's a vampire who survives by draining the life force from unsuspecting diplomats. Ethan chuckled to himself, then paused. Because if he was honest, There had been other strange things, like the way Leora seemed most alive under the twin moons of Valthera during their brief stopover. How her reflection in the silvered pools of the pleasure gardens seemed to ripple oddly, like a signal struggling through static. How, in their shared suite, she sometimes stood for hours by the observation window, not moving, her breath misting faintly against the glass while the stars wheeled around them. Ethan decided he was overthinking things. Probably, hopefully. Besides, if she were going to eat him, she probably would have done it already. Right? Still, caution and several decades of bad decisions dictated that he do some discreet investigating, which was how he found himself 3 nights later, crouched behind a decorative fountain shaped like an 8-armed squid, spying on his own wife during her midnight stroll through the ship's gardens. It wasn't exactly his proudest moment, especially when the fountain decided mid-surveillance that he looked dehydrated and blasted him with a jet of scented mist. Spluttering, half-blinded, and smelling vaguely of alien lilacs, Ethan tried to regain his dignity as Leora turned, perfectly composed, and arched an eyebrow at him. "Hiding from me, husband." "Stretching," Ethan lied instantly. "Fountains are great for, limbering up." She strolled closer, predatory grace in every step. Her smile was amused, but her eyes were sharp, calculating. "If you have questions," she said softly, "you should ask them. I prefer honesty." Ethan hesitated. Then, because he'd already made an idiot of himself, he decided he might as well dive into the deep end. "Are you," he said, voice cracking slightly, "a vampire?" There was a long, thick silence. Somewhere in the distance, the ship's automated entertainment system started playing smooth jazz, as if trying to diffuse the tension. Leora's expression didn't change immediately. Then, very slowly, she laughed, a rich melodic sound that wrapped around him like a warm blanket and a sharp blade all at once. "A vampire," she repeated, shaking her head. "Is that what you think?" "Well," Ethan said, feeling absurd, "you don't eat. You love the night. Your reflection does weird things, and there's the whole mysterious ancient people with a thing for bloodlines vibe you've got going on." She stepped so close he could feel the cold energy radiating from her, a subtle thrum beneath his skin. She tilted her head, studying him. "I am Eldrith," she said at last. "We are different. Older than most races know. Our sustenance is not like yours. We draw life from energy, from essence, not from blood. It is ancient science woven into our biology, a symbiosis, not a slaughter." "So," Ethan said cautiously, "you're more like a very classy energy vampire?" Her mouth twitched. "If you like. And you're not planning to, drain me dry in my sleep?" Her eyes gleamed, but her voice was soft, almost tender. "Not unless you ask very nicely." He snorted, the tension breaking. It wasn't the neat, tidy answer he wanted, but somehow it was enough. For now. They walked together through the gardens, the stars spinning in lazy arcs beyond the transparent ceiling. Somewhere along the path, she slipped her hand into his, her fingers cool but steady. "So," Ethan said, grinning sidelong at her, "if we're being honest, you should know I once failed to make instant noodles. Burned them. The water. Everything." She laughed again, this time full and unguarded. "You are a remarkable creature, Ethan Morgan." "Yeah, well, you married me. So who's the real cautionary tale here?" She squeezed his hand, and for the first time, Ethan felt that maybe, just maybe, he wasn't completely out of his depth. Of course, he was spectacularly wrong about that. But that was a story for another night. The trouble started with the ship's breakfast buffet. Ethan was halfway through a questionable pile of synthetic pancakes, ingredients sourced from highly sustainable mystery proteins, according to the menu, when the celestial waltz lurched violently. His fork somersaulted into his lap. Alarms whooped. A synthesized voice announced, with far too much enthusiasm, "Brace for unexpected boarding. Have a pleasant day." Across the dining hall, dignitaries screamed, aliens scattered, and one particularly round ambassador tried to roll under a table, but got stuck halfway. Ethan wiped syrup off his face, sighed heavily, and muttered, "Well, there goes the continental breakfast." Leora appeared at his side an instant later, looking infuriatingly composed. She tossed him a slim silver baton that hummed with lethal energy. "Here," she said, "point and click." "Like a remote control?" "Exactly, except it incinerates people." "Neat." They rushed into the corridor as magnetic thuds echoed along the ship's hull, boarding pods attaching like angry barnacles. Ethan caught glimpses of them through the portholes. Black, insectile vessels marked with the sigil of the Draxith Marauders, notorious space raiders with the charming habit of vaporizing hostages after stealing their shoes. "You know," Ethan panted as they ran, "I thought being married to you would be more diplomatic," Leora smirked. "Welcome to marriage, husband. It's rarely what you expect." Before Ethan could deliver a witty comeback, he had several locked and loaded, mostly involving life insurance policies. They skidded into the main atrium. A squad of marauders had already broken through, weapons crackling, faces hidden behind bone-like masks. Leora stepped forward calmly. She didn't draw a weapon. She didn't even raise her voice. She just looked at them. For one heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the nearest marauder dropped his blaster, fell to his knees, and started weeping uncontrollably. His companions weren't far behind, clutching their heads, stumbling backward. Ethan gaped. "What did you do?" "Projected a fragment of my essence," Leora said, as if discussing weather patterns. "Showed them their deepest fears, magnified 1,000-fold. Ethan blinked. "Remind me never to complain about your cooking." They secured the atrium in minutes, but the victory was short-lived. Through the emergency broadcasts, they learned the marauders hadn't just come for loot. They were hunting someone, specifically Leora, and not because of her dazzling fashion sense. The Eldrith, it turned out, weren't just respected across the galaxy. They were feared. Ancient legends spoke of the Blooded, a secret lineage among the Eldrith who could, under certain conditions, awaken powers capable of reshaping matter itself. Energy manipulation, life transference, reality bending. The Marauders believed Leora was one of them, and judging by the casual mind-melting she just performed, Ethan suspected they weren't wrong. As they retreated deeper into the ship, Ethan finally cornered her in a service corridor lined with humming plasma conduits. "You should have told me," he said quietly, "about all this, about you." She looked at him, truly looked at him, with a gaze that peeled away every defense he'd ever built. "I thought if you knew," she said, "you would fear me, or worse, pity me." Ethan, who had spent most of his adult life getting into fistfights with vending machines and losing, couldn't help but laugh. "Leora, you married a man who once tried to bribe a customs officer with expired coupons. I'm not exactly a model of judgment." For the first time, the tension in her shoulders eased, but their moment was shattered as the bulkhead exploded inward. The Marauder commander stomped through, clad in a suit of adaptive armor that crackled with stolen Eldrith tech. He leveled a massive cannon at Leora's heart. "Come quietly," he rasped through his mask, "and your consort will live." Ethan, without thinking, stepped in front of her. Leora made a small broken sound, half a warning, half a plea, but Ethan just winked over his shoulder. "Relax, I have a plan." The plan, such as it was, involved Ethan lunging forward and wildly mashing buttons on the cannon. Shockingly, this worked about as well as one might expect. The weapon fired in a random direction, blowing a neat hole through the floor. The commander yelped as gravity abruptly stopped playing by the rules and he tumbled into the maintenance decks below, swearing creatively. Ethan peered after him. "Huh, not my worst improvisation." Leora laughed, a real, unguarded laugh, and in a blur of motion, sealed the breach with a pulse of shimmering energy. In the aftermath, while ship security mopped up the remaining marauders, assisted by several deeply offended Trillian flower ambassadors who weaponized their pollen in new and terrifying ways, Ethan and Leora stood side by side in the ruined corridor. "So," Ethan said casually, brushing soot off his jacket, "still glad you married me?" She cupped his face in her cool, elegant hands. "More than you will ever know." They kissed there, among the broken wires and the flickering emergency lights, while the stars wheeled endlessly beyond the ship's walls. Later, after the repairs and the interrogations, and a truly spectacular celebratory feast, featuring only minimally hazardous foods, they sat curled together in their suite. Ethan traced lazy patterns on Leora's arm. So, about the whole ancient cosmic power thing, that gonna, pop up at inconvenient times? She smiled. Possibly, especially if you continue burning toast. One time, he grumbled. One time, and the fire suppression system still hasn't forgiven me. Her laughter was soft, but her eyes were serious. You have changed me, Ethan Morgan. You remind me that power alone is meaningless without kindness, without absurdity, without hope. He grinned. Yeah, I'm basically the galaxy's leading supplier of absurdity. And for that, she said, leaning in, I am endlessly grateful. They watched the stars together, the future sprawling wide and unknown before them. But for the first time, Ethan didn't feel out of his depth. He wasn't just surviving. He was exactly where he was meant to be, beside a woman who could bend the fabric of reality and still laugh at his terrible jokes. In the grand, swirling dance of the universe, they had found each other. And whatever came next, pirates, space vampire politics, catastrophic buffet incidents, they would face it together, one cosmic disaster at a time.